All right. Well, as everyone continues to put in the chat a bit about where they're from and what your motivation is, I just wanted to thank you all for being here. It's a great group, and we are very excited on behalf of Philanthropy Network, Greater Philadelphia, to welcome our members, along with a lot of new faces in different organizations. So we're excited to bring all of you together. So I'm Mariah Casillas. I'm the VP of Learning and Evaluation at Philanthropy Network. And I am so excited that we are continuing our partnership with Chicago Beyond to bring you this session. So we actually featured their work a few years ago at our Spark session. So some of you may remember that. And we just want to pick up that conversation again, because we know that power dynamics need to change. I think everyone here recognizes that, but we know that spotting them and changing them is a whole different story. So I'd like to introduce John Irvin and add ready to share more about themselves, their work, and where we're all gathered here to learn. But first, a few housekeeping things. So just a reminder, as you all know, please stay muted unless you're adding a question or comment. We really want to encourage you to be lively in the chat, to make sure you're sharing your observations, your questions, or you can just unmute yourself. Do have a larger group today, so we'll try and make sure we see you. And as you all saw, we are recording the conversation because we know there's a number of people who can't be here today. So I think that's everything. I'll pass it over to John and Ed.
Thank you so much, Mariah. Thank you to the Philanthropy Network of Greater Philadelphia for having us here today. So excited by everyone that's here. I'm John Irvin from Chicago Beyond. We're an impact investor that's putting everything we can behind young people to be able to step into their fullest potential. Joined by co-presenter Advait Reddy. Advait, if you want to give a quick intro.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Don't need to repeat anything John just said, but name's Advait Reddy. Also work at Chicago Beyond on our strategy team, and we think about these topics of impact every day. So really excited to discuss it.
Awesome. You're also, you may hear from or see a few other members of our team. Shout out Eva Liu, who is here behind the scenes monitoring the chat. As Mariah mentioned, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. We'll try to keep them more of a discussion. Also, feel free to just hop on in, unmute, jump in. We'll share some stories, but meant to be a conversation. But yeah, really excited to have everyone here. Saw funders, community organizations, I think some researchers, popping into the chat, people who care deeply about equity, about impact, about making the world a better place, about healthy and wealthy communities, so many great things. So what we're going to cover today, real quick, we're going to tell you a little bit more about our why, kind of how it led us to this "why am I always being researched" question. I'm going to share a few practical tools, getting at those power dynamics that Mariah was talking about, things like noticing, things like relating, and a framework for change. And then we're going to spend some time together bringing this into practice. And I want to caution, I know we have an hour and a half and it feels like a lot of time, but like some of this stuff is deeply ingrained. We're not going to solve all of this today, right? Like we're going to start to begin to practice, start to notice, start to see some things, but hopefully just beginning some of that practice, practicing some of these muscles. So our why and where this came from. To back it up all the way, Chicago Beyond's founder, Liz Dozier, was first a principal at Fenger High School in Chicago's Roseland neighborhood. And it was a school labeled by the outside world as one of the worst failures of urban America. But by the time Liz left that school to found Chicago Beyond, things were different, dramatically different. Some people noticed or counted that where there used to be several hundred arrests per year in the school building, that was no longer happening. Other people counted that graduation rates had doubled in a few years. But if you ask folks who were there, the biggest change was less what the adults in the building did, but a shift in orientation, a different way of seeing the school, a different way of seeing the students and their experiences in the school. So fast forward, 2016, Liz Dozier founding Chicago Beyond. It too is about a change in orientation. to the work of supporting young people, an orientation that we'll get some time to talk more about today. But this time less as a school and more as an impact investor, which is what Chicago Beyond is. Chicago Beyond, for context, invests in organizations, ideas, individuals, everything from like the grassroots hyper-local level to the broader systemic, deeper level. To illustrate just a bit, since founding, invested over $40 million in organizations like Healing Hurt People Chicago. It's actually an organization with roots here in Philadelphia that helps young people heal from the emotional wounds of trauma in the golden hour after experiencing intentional urban violence. Also, I say here as if we're all in Philadelphia, but also things like the Resident Association of Greater Englewood, an organization that aims to heal a community in Chicago that's faced historic disinvestment, decades of political exclusion, and aiming to bring that change by, for, and with residents as the key change agents. So that's Chicago Beyond. I spoke about orientation though, and through this work of trying to support young people, to support their freedom, to support their liberation, we found that the status quo way of operating was insufficient. We were wondering if the standard ways of operating, the groove that we as a member of the funding community found ourselves in was really setting us up to get to these broader visions. And we knew we needed to look at this work a different way. I'm going to caution as we get into this, I say orientation, and that's because this isn't about a method. There isn't like the one right way to think about measurement or evaluation or research. So we're not going to prescribe anything like that. It's also not about like caring about equity or not caring about equity. I mean, it's clear through the chat how much passion everyone in this call has for this work, right? So that's not what it is either. But it's about taking a hard look at the ways in which we produce data, the way we measure, the way we research, the way we evaluate impact, and finding it insufficient and getting in the way of that impact that everyone here wants to have. We found for us, it leads to things like failing to recognize things that do work and shifting resources away. It's led to things like over-investing based on a partial understanding, limiting the impact of the work that we can do. And it's led to things like imposing costs without providing as much value, specifically to those from whom the most has been taken and for those that we exist to serve. We realized if we want to get to greater impact, we have to get to more authentic truth.
Thanks for building there, John. And, like you mentioned, we have a diverse audience here today, and I think we can all agree that we're motivated by this common goal of impact. And we want to know if what we're doing is going to get us there, whether it's through data, evaluation, research, whatever tool we decide to end up using. And so we wanted to anchor in a story of an organization, no pun intended, called Storycatchers Theater. Storycatchers is an organization that empowers justice involved young people to tell their stories through musical theater, moving past their histories to transform their lives and their communities. Chicago Beyond partnered with Storycatchers to help grow the impact of their post-release employment program, Changing Voices, and help them move the program from part-time to full-time. Our other goal, though, was to help fund some research for them through a randomized control trial or RCT to help Storycatchers demonstrate the impact/effectiveness of their model. Again, something we can all relate to, wanting to prove that what we're doing is working so that we can get more funding, we can get more opportunities, more exposure, and again, hopefully, in turn, get more impact. As we were doing this, we realized like there were no simple answers to measuring success, especially when we're dealing with young people involved in the justice system. There's so many complex issues: mass incarceration, disinvestment, systemic racism. And if we create these measurements that are top down, that are based in these biased systems, we have to take a step back and understand if we're actually doing something that creates a good measure of success. So the young man pictured here on this slide, his name is John Tay, joined Storycatchers back in 2016. He, like most others in the program, was involved in the justice system at a young age, a common experience for young people with unresolved trauma and who deal with these systemic challenges. After joining Storycatchers, Jonte flourished. He showed drive and motivation. He was really a model example for his peers. And like any other leader, he was not afraid to speak up when he saw something that was wrong. And he asked us a question that inspired us really ever since, and inspired all this work. Why am I always being researched? We soon found out that besides the study that was going on at Storycatchers, he'd also been approached by 2 other organizations at the same time to also participate in research studies. And it also wasn't the first time he'd been asked to participate. This wasn't even the first time he'd been asked to participate. And so where was the value being generated for him? This caused us to stop and think about what we were doing, so what we were measuring. When we were using an RCT, we were focusing on a single binary metric like recidivism. And could that really capture the full context of the experience of people going through this program? Could we just find they're thriving based off whether they were arrested or reincarcerated? What about the relationships built, the confidence instilled, the healing power of them sharing their stories? Do we have to wait 7 years in order to say whether or not we are creating impact? Similarly, we also saw there were a lot of unintentional costs despite our best intentions. In creating a randomized controlled trial, we had to randomize the groups. So some relationships between staff and young people in the program have to be broken apart by virtue of the study. Additionally, we had to create a control group, which meant that Storycatchers had to create relationships with a group of young people, only to not follow through on actually providing them services. In the end, Storycatchers ultimately decided to stop the study early and treat it as a pilot study using the data they gathered up to that point. They asked us for permission to do this, and we were fully supportive upon hearing their rationale. Now, this doesn't mean the Storycatchers decided to just stop measuring impact because it was too complex. Instead, what it meant was they decided, because it was so complex, to create a more bottom-up way of measuring impact using the feedback of their young participants, teaching artists, frontline staff, and leadership to collectively define what they should measure and why. Adding metrics like reported confidence, job readiness, behavior change, and collecting them in ways that didn't affect their operations and what they were really eventually trying to provide, that impact, and hurting it. So they landed a framework that was still rigorous, but much more authentic to the organization as a whole.
Looking back, we learned a lot through this process with Storycatchers, with so many other partners that face similar challenges, trying to answer this question around measurement, data, impact. So we try to memorialize our learnings, and that's what this guidebook really is. We wanted to ensure that we kept young men like Jonte, so many others like him that we've had the pleasure to meet in mind as we think about measurement and evaluation. So really, we wrote this guidebook first to ourselves. We've shared it externally to multiple audiences too, in case some of the learnings would resonate. And really thinking about kind of the broad ecosystem of folks that kind of collectively hold up the system, that status quo, that groove I was talking about that we sometimes tend to fall into because the common way of doing things. But all of us have a role to play here. And I think, just looking at kind of who's here on this call, I think we all play different roles. Some of us demand evidence to make decisions. Some of us commission evidence. Some of us create the evidence. Some of us feel like we're subjects of evidence. And all of this sort of props up the status quo, keeps us in that groove, keeps us kind of keeping things as they are. So we shared this, and honestly, we were surprised how well some of this, that we'll talk through, resonated in different spaces. Found resonance in everything from like design firms to peer funders to government folks to folks in education, folks in the tech sector, researchers, community organizations, just all the different folks that kind of contribute to the current ecosystem. Spanning 70 plus countries in all 50 states. What this is here, is just kind of a snapshot of some of the different places it's resonated. Maybe I'll turn it over to you to maybe share one example in a different context.
Yeah, thanks, John. So the University of California, San Francisco, was starting to do a study with pregnant women on preterm births. And they actually cited they used YMI as a resource in reorienting the study to more center the development of the study or co-create the development of the study alongside the pregnant women who were involved. And when they did this, the women themselves cited that they found the process of being researched and being involved in this impact measurement, the process itself was healing. So it didn't require them to wait, the full 2 years to see the impact through some sort of program expansion, but the process itself had a positive impact. And the lesson learned really is that evaluating impact, if done in a way that's authentic, can be healing. It can be giving, not taking.
Thanks for sharing that, Advait. So for everyone here, we've been storytelling for quite a bit now. Maybe I'm going to pause here for a quick second. I'll take a look at the chat. Eva, thank you for being on the chat. If anything had popped in, feel free to elevate it. If folks have questions or reactions or just anything, please hop in. We'll hold it a minute here, and then we'll shift into maybe some of the more practical tools. Cool. That was my best teacher pause, as they say. If you have questions, if you're in the middle of typing them, still type them. We'll bring them in. Oh, plenty of space for like small group discussion, big group discussion for the rest of the time. So, practical tools, right? How do I actually do this? What does it mean to start to address power dynamics? I want to highlight this idea of practice and what that means kind of for us, right? Because it's, I keep coming back to this idea of being in a groove, and it's about, not just thinking about these things and saying, okay, cool, we've checked the box, we've got this, but actually shifting practice. It's actually getting out of that groove. And what we found is this is actually a pretty joyful practice. If we think back to our why, it's fundamentally about young people, their freedom and opportunity to thrive. We know that the reality is right now, our young people are facing very difficult situations. There's young people losing their lives in this moment. So we're interested in anything we can do to shift practice and find more authentic truth and ultimately lead it to impact. And even if it's maybe sometimes uncomfortable to wrestle with things like power dynamics and maybe get out of the status quo, it's so joyful to be able to think and to imagine different ways of operating, to be able to bring that why, that impact to life. Jennifer, just want to call out your note in the chat. Thanks so much. Love the idea of co-design, co-community creation. We'll talk even more about what that can look like today. I'm going to talk quickly on noticing and relating. So I'll offer first a story and a tool on noticing. And Jen, this might get a bit at your question that I just saw in the chat around how do we get staff to see the value of the process. I think noticing and relating might actually be two great tools here. So on noticing, I actually didn't tell a story that's completely unrelated most likely unrelated to some of the work that we all do. And it's the story of Tim Galway. And this is the story, as I understand it. If you all are Tim Galway experts and deep into the field of tennis, hop on in, tell me the full story here. But as I understand it, as someone who's really never played tennis, Tim Galway was a tennis pro, telling people how to fix their backhand. And he had one student, and pro after pro was coming in and saying, hey, your racket's too high. And you'd be like, all right, cool, I got it. Racket's too high. And the swing didn't change. So pro after pro was telling him this. Tim Galway realizing that being the sixth pro to say, hey, your racket's too high, probably isn't going to be the thing that changes it. He looked over and saw that there was this like reflective glass on the clubhouse wall, essentially a mirror that he could use, and said, hey, don't worry about anything else. Just watch your swing. Just look at your hands as you hit this backhand shot. Watch yourself as you swing. And he saw exactly where the racket was. And not surprisingly, the student saw, oh, that is kind of high. But he knew where that was and what it felt like to be that high. And then they started to practice, 1, 2, 3 shots. And Tim's instruction was not lower your racket, but just notice where your hands are and see what happens. And slowly but surely, with just that instruction, like the racket slowly lowered until he was hitting clean backhands. And this isn't a story about like how we should all play tennis better, but the fundamental idea is, the power of what happens when we can slow down, bring attention to something with no judgment, and see what opportunities that creates for change. It's actually, from our experience so far, one of the most powerful things we can do to decondition inequity to get out of that group is noticing. And for some of us, that's enough. Just noticing can lead to shifts. But that's not the only tool we have. A second tool that I'll offer is relating, being in relationship. And it's not about like the number of people how many LinkedIn connections you have with folks, or you could pass so many different people walking down the street, but not really relate. Maybe you see the same person every time you get your morning coffee, but like, do you really relate, right? It's about that quality of relatedness. Is there space for you to see for a moment from someone else's perspective of opening up what, influences what you believe about the world? So for some of us, maybe that's enough. Maybe it's just spending time being in a relationship, understanding a different perspective to open up opportunities for change. I'll offer those two tools first and fundamentally to notice power dynamics and relate to see how some of the power dynamics in your relationships or in the work you're doing might show up. But for some of us, and I'm definitely in this camp, that could use maybe a more intellectual framework. We have one. But just coming back, as we tell stories, keep coming back to the noticing, to the relating, because that undergirds all of this. And that's how this framework, these 7 power dynamics and 7 opportunities for change show up. But maybe you could talk us through this framework a bit.
Yeah, so I can start walking us through this. And what we kind of have on here are the 7 foundational power dynamics and inequities that we highlighted as part of this work. And with each inequity comes an opportunity to drive more impact. I'll give a quick definition of each, but we also have some breakout rooms coming up where we'll each kind of go into one of these in a little bit more detail. So hopefully we'll kind of exit this conversation with a more robust understanding. But kind of just going around the circle here. First opportunity is, to change who has access to leading impact measurement, this whole invite only dynamic. Number 2, how can we share information to remove asymmetry and enable actual effective partnership? 3, can we redefine who and what inputs have validity so we might reach more informed decisions? 4, can we shift whose ownership must be earned versus already assumed when we're talking about impact measurement? 5, can we more holistically measure value for all parties, including unintended costs? 6, can we put in place systems to create accountability to protect those most vulnerable, usually our community organizations, when our methods of measuring impact end up having these unintended costs? And finally, 7, reconsider whose voices have authorship over the narrative being told and the meaning that gets made. So I want to note up front, these power dynamics are not mutually exclusive. They're definitely overlapping and interrelated, just like the problems we serve. And so think of them less as a way to classify inequities you see, but rather as lenses through which to notice and relate. So John and I wanted to kick us off before we get into the breakout rooms, was given a couple examples of how we've noticed these power dynamics in our work. So I'll start off by adding a little bit more color to validity. With the key question being, could we be making uninformed decisions because of who or what we are allowing as valid inputs? So at Chicago Beyond, we partner with an organization called Embed, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, to help create a safe home designed to be a haven for young men who are in imminent danger and want to make a change in their lives. And this concept didn't come from research, didn't come from a rigorous data set, it didn't come from our internal team or frankly any other powerful stakeholders in our city. The idea came from the experience of a single young person who needed a safe place to breathe, to rest, to recover. Our founder, Liz Dozier, being a former high school principal herself, could understand the need the moment she heard it. And so we didn't wait to see if this need was backed by empirical evidence before we moved into action. Need was right now, and if we waited really any longer, lives could be lost. And the real lesson learned for us here is, we don't need hundreds of people to be telling us something is needed in order for us to say it's needed. Sometimes we just need one person.
Thanks so much. I'd hop in with another story, and gonna center on this idea of value. Value for whom? Who or what do I deem valuable? Kind of the key questions here. So context, Lawndale Christian Legal Center, or LCLC, as we commonly refer to them, and they refer to themselves, provides legal support coupled with holistic wraparound services. So think like case management, education, mental wellness support, job training, etc., to young men facing criminal charges. They know and they've seen that it's the holistic supports, the support for the whole person, that can really change outcomes for these young men. So LCLC sees opportunity to prove out the effectiveness of this more holistic support model and transform the way that indigent legal defense works in the city and in the country. However, the community in which they operate, North Lawndale in Chicago, has a deep history of being researched. As a lifelong community member and former LCLC staff member said, Karen Jackson said, in the 1960s, we were doing studies in North Lawndale. And here it is, almost 60 years later. At this point, 60 plus years later. What's the positive outcome we're going to see? And will this be in these young men's lifetimes? So, given this tenuous history, before beginning research, the team took great care to really consider the benefits, the costs, and the risks. And not just costs and risks that you might think of to say like the researcher, like will community members work with us, or the funder, like, hey, will we get the study done on time and on budget? But to the community organizations and to the Lawndale neighborhood itself. So for example, this like cost benefit analysis included the reputational risk to LCLC of bringing yet more researchers into this community. It's also considered the cost to staff morale, many of whom have deep roots in the community and are wary of this type of research. It also meant understanding the intended benefits, not from our perspective or the researcher's perspective, but from LCLC's perspective, from the community perspective, and realizing that like simply generating information about the model wasn't sufficient. Instead, the goal was explicitly about generating conclusive enough evidence that can motivate system actors to change. So to center these benefits, these costs, these risks for LCLC and the Lawndale community, they formed a community-based evaluation committee that held real power to consider these trade-offs and ultimately decide what type of research was necessary for their goals. It also involved really wrestling with some of these things and understanding the impacts from different folks. Speaks a little bit about relating. And Jen, coming back to your question around how do I get staff to see why the process itself should be considered. What Lawndale Christian Legal, Chicago Beyond, and the researchers did was held a peace circle. We sat in a circle and just understood where everybody was coming from. How do the benefits, costs, and risks look to different folks sitting across the room, and using that space to center why we're all doing the work. and centering LCLC, the young people in the community, as a fundamental goal. I'm just holding that space to wrestle with it. So we as a funder served as a thought partner and advocate for LCLC. And also, held space, right? It's not like this is easy. So this meant like expanding timelines to ensure that we actually did the work the right way versus just doing the work. With that, and those couple examples, maybe Advait, I'll turn it over to you. I think we have a few folks from Chicago Beyond hopping on in the next minute or two, and we'll shortly break out into some breakout rooms.
Yep. So like I mentioned up front, we're gonna be each trying to explore in small groups one of these power dynamics in a little bit more detail. When we hop into these breakout rooms, let's take a moment, let's introduce ourselves. To kind of select somebody from the group to kind of be a note taker or spokesperson. We want to kind of report out as we kind of all come back to the main room afterward. Take a minute to read through. We'll be putting another slide up in each breakout room that goes into the definitions of these power dynamics in a little bit more detail. Then reflect on these two questions that are up front here. What strikes you in the description of this power dynamic, and how does it show up in your work? The last thing I'll note is, when you look at the slides we're going to be sharing, there is an orientation in research when you look at the language. But I want to again note that research is only one method of impact measurement. So as you reflect, think about all the different ways that you measure impact in your work. Maybe it's through research, but maybe it's just through general data collection, surveys, case studies, quotes, conversations, the quantitative and the qualitative, because really these 7 power dynamics really apply to all. So with that, not sure if we had, Mariah, do we have everybody in for the 7 breakouts?
Yeah, we do. And actually, it looks like it's going to be 6 right now, but everyone is currently assigned.
Awesome. How about we launch into them?
All right. Did anyone else feel like that was like the shortest 10 minutes? That was actually technically longer than 10 minutes of all time. I felt that way. I've been in similar types of conversations around this topic. And I always feel that way. So if you're like, we're starting to get there, that's okay. That's what this is. So just starting to get some ideas out. We're going to hold some time. I think we got about 15-ish minutes here. So hopefully we can get into some good discussion. What I'll do is I'll actually just go through dynamic by dynamic. I know we hit 6 of the 7. So if I'm addressing one that we didn't get into, totally cool. Just let me know. Let's open it up for discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to the access group. Would love to hear if there's anyone who wants to share back out, just kind of top few highlights, either things discussed, some unanswered questions, and rest of the group, feel free to hop in. What does that resonate? What questions does it raise for you? Access group, anyone want to hop in?
Jen, there you go.
Yeah, thanks. Both the Jens. It was really helpful for me. I'm working on a platform build, and I'm trying to figure out how to hear what's needed and also what's not currently present and whose voices aren't currently part of the process. And it was helpful just to remind myself that I have to think about that and to how to work that into what we're doing.
Jen D.
Yeah, we had a great conversation. I talked a little bit about a research project that we did a couple of years ago, statewide, because we're doing some community work. We're a statewide organization, although we're in PA. So just thinking about access, how to build the table or help, community members build the table, bring the table to them, whatever, I don't know, or whatever, however you want to say that. And Steve gave me some really good things to think about there, because we will continue to do some research in communities and how to really get them access, and a little bit more authentically give them access.
So Bethany, are you gonna add? If not, I want Jen to have to share like where she is in her job and what we're specifically gonna take back with her unique position.
Jen F, take it away. Like this, it was a great conversation. I only got to be a part of a little piece of it. So I want to give her the space to talk.
So, so I'm a recent Philanthropy Network hire, beginning of January, and I was hired to help with this online platform build. That's the Gates Foundation is funding, which is the aim is to have an impact on equity in grant making. But what the point that I raised about access, I mean, the very first point was that the grantees themselves, you know, where we're trying to guide our members, our funders to the grantees, and the grantees aren't on this platform and they're not members of Philanthropy Network. So that's just a huge gap in terms of access and also understanding, like, you know, if I don't understand their needs and their voice and our, you know, how are we building the right platform? So that was a really, and there isn't, you know, an easy solution for that with Philanthropy Network. You know, we can't simply open that door. So how do you ensure that you're still listening for that voice and pointing out? I mean, that was, I think, what Steve's great advice was just continuing to message that they're not there. And so, you know, just keeping that at the front of the mind. Whatever we're going to build is going to have that gap, and you know, just keep it in mind, keep it in front of everyone's face that this, you know, this is something, a challenge that we need to continue to address.
Great job, Access.
Go Access team. Any reactions to what the two Jen, Steve, and Bethany had shared with us? Anyone not from the Access group reacting strongly? If not, let me turn it over to information. Can we get a rep from information to hop in and share some of the things that they heard and discussed in their group?
Hi, I'm Lauren Stebbins. I'm at the Bear Foundation, and I was taking some notes on some key themes that emerged from our conversation about effectively partnering to get full truth and information. And so 3 things that stood out were really kind of, instead of leading with questions focused on the information you want to know, really just talking to the community first in terms of like asking them, what are you interested in? What are your priorities? What are the things that keep you up at night? What are you constantly just thinking about or worried about or concerned about? And then kind of like using that as sort of the gateway, the entry point into a discussion, and kind of letting it flow from there, as a way to, perhaps build trust, start building a relationship, and hopefully, get deeper into that. The second key theme that came up was, is it possible to compensate people for their time, right? And that kind of speaks to just understanding that everyone's time is very valuable, and that, there, even if it's hard to conceptualize, there's a cost to participating in, information and data collection efforts, especially, of course, for the people that are participants and for being, studied in one way or another. So, if it's possible to compensate people for their time, perhaps that's something to, strongly consider. And then the last sort of key point / theme that came up was, are there opportunities to embed information and data collection efforts into things that the community is already doing? So are there certain types of events or kind of community meetings that are just happening, whether it's something that happens kind of regularly or something that's, kind of just a one-time thing that's popping up for one reason or another, one reason or another? Is there, is that possibly an appropriate opportunity to attend and talk to folks and then get a pulse on, what they care about and are concerned about And it could be in relation to whatever the event is focused on, or maybe it presents opportunities to talk about a whole range of things, but just instead of like asking for people's time outside of what they're already doing, looking at what they're already doing and seeing if you can perhaps join in that and get information that way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. Power of leading with relationships, understanding priorities first. I'm curious, value group, if some of the things shared, compensating people for time, considering the costs of participating and embedding in existing processes, that rang true for you all. I know I'm kind of bouncing out of order here, but maybe I'll turn it over to value group to hop in for any reactions to what Lauren shared and maybe some of the things your group talked through.
Alicia, I'll cue you here.
Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing, that there felt like a lot of crossover between our conversation. Yeah, Alicia Atkinson from United Way. And yeah, just to share some high level thoughts, I think we also were talking about the tension. One of our participants talked about working with practitioners in the space and feeling like they have to collect data and share data in a certain way to kind of hold, to kind of perform and that pressure, even though with this movement of trust-based philanthropy and conversations of trying to let practitioners lead more, I think there's a lot of pressure to continue to perform at a high level because there's a lot of risk, right? There's a lot of risk for them in not performing. And I think that's something else that resonated with me when Lauren was speaking around, like, how do people who, hold power, the funders in the space, take on greater risk to push against the systems they're up against to kind of shift this dialogue. I think, Lauren, when you were talking too, is kind of like, how do we more enter these relationships to be of service instead of to be like command and control the situation. I think the simplicity of being like, how do you already talk to your community members? Like, how are you already asking questions? I think that's similar. And I think another thing we talked about was like the urgency of the situations that we're trying to solve for and how that can feel like a lot of pressure. But, I think something that is always on my mind is like, what do we already know that we could be making progress on without having to go back to community, and how are we really, just the risks of continuing to ask community for feedback when nothing is really changing in their lives, and how that can erode trust and engagement and all the things that the relationship over time, I think, as well. So I went a little off script, but hopefully, I don't know if anyone else in my group wants to chime in, but I think those are the things we talked about. Yeah, but feel free to add on.
All right, validity, ownership, accountability, authorship groups. Looking at y'all. What resonated from what everyone shared so far from the Jens, Lauren, and Alicia? And how does that connect to some of the things your group talked about?
I think, so hi, my name is Sam. I'm representing Research for Action, and I was with the accountability group. I think one contribution the accountability group could make to this conversation is just how we focused on conversations as really being the key to accountability. And so that might mean funders having conversations with grantees or with the people served to become aware and notice the assumptions that they might have that actually could be incorrect and could be leading to solutions that won't work. It could also be about getting other kinds of feedback and sharing power. It could also be realizing that you could have a whole process and a whole structure, even like a form of governance, that is ultimately participatory. That participation doesn't have to exist in like one small thing that you do, but community participation could be part of how you elect a board or other kinds of structures. And then finally, there's also just this idea that there's a difference between quality and quantity. when it comes to getting information, and that ease for participants can be good for quality. That you don't necessarily need to collect everything, but you can have really great quality interactions with people over the phone, where a funder can learn so much rich information that they could never get out of like a 2-hour grant report or something like that. So I think just the accountability group really looked at conversations, and I think that adds a lot to this conversation.
In so many ways, it comes back to relating and noticing, right? Through these conversations, and checking those assumptions that could be creating harm. Yes, Alicia, every conversation is data, right? Data is, as someone who loves numbers, data is not numbers. It is so many things. Let me turn it over. Actually, validity, ownership, authorship. Anyone want to hop in? Reactions to what's been shared so far? Things from your group to add?
I'm Jenny Snyder. I'm the program manager at the Nelson Foundation, and I was in the note taker for the ownership group. And I think a lot of what we discussed was already kind of brought up, but especially I think, well, the first thing that really came up was that it is, when you look at it in black and white, it is kind of absurd that we're having to have these conversations about sharing ownership. Like why is that not the norm? And so we discussed a little bit about how it's showing up and what we need to do to make it be more norm. And one of the things was that came up is, if the studied organization or this, or the organization that's participating in research, if they don't have the time and the capacity, they might just be like, fine, you do it. And so how do we, speaking of thinking about the costs and resources that it costs them and making sure they're involved, but then also giving them the place and the opportunity to kind of stand up for themselves and not see power, to have that trust and be comfortable telling you and like what they need and what they can and can't do, what their capacity really is to participate, and then honoring that. So we talked a lot about considering what changes we would need to make to shift those power dynamics and build that trust. And then, if we are doing data collection and research, how important it is to share back in the end the results and learnings, because organizations need to know that their participation had value and that something came out of it in the end. Yeah, and then folks did share some examples of where they've seen that when the community input is not included and when the community is not an owner, then it just does not work. It doesn't work out. So yeah, there was definitely some example sharing. That's all.
Thank you, Jenny. Reactions, and then I know we're missing one group. Don't know which it is. But if your group has not had their thoughts in the conversation, hop on in. Reactions, anything that's been said so far. Anything else you might add?
I can add a quick few thoughts on authorship. I lead communications at Chicago Beyond, and even in creating the guidebook, Why Am I Always Being Researched, the idea of authorship and whose voice we were honoring and experiences we were honoring was really something that we tried to keep at the center of the entire process of even creating the book, from who's writing it and, where we're even conducting interviews or who's being interviewed, and making sure they have all the information to understand what the book would be about. So authorship has a million other questions, I think, tied to it, but it's trying to keep it really at the center of your work, no matter if it's related to research or just even storytelling, like creating a website, and things like that.
Thanks so much for bringing that into the space, Katie. In so many ways, and I don't know if we've had a chance to say this, so just to make sure it's here and super clear. Well, maybe we would have, put pen to paper or typed the keys. So much of these ideas are not our ideas, right? This is knowledge that's existed in the community for decades. Our role here was just, bringing space and maybe amplifying some of the things people have already been saying. So just to be super clear. I believe, my memory is terrible, y'all. If it's a different group, let me know. I believe Validity is the group that not had a chance to speak. Want to open the floor and give space to add any additional thoughts in this big group.
I don't know, Annie, Cheryl, Erin, or anyone else in the Validity group, if you want to just add any other thoughts. I know a lot of what's been discussed resonated with some of the points raised, but I want to make sure we have the space for you guys to add too.
I can share a little bit. So I think that, yeah, a lot of what has been discussed has definitely resonated with us. I think we had some great representation in our group in terms of folks who were funders and folks who received funding from the nonprofit side as well. And so I think two big highlights for me, at least, that resonated was just this role of a researcher and coming into communities. Just that initial trust is something that is really important. In terms of building anything meaningful out of the data that's going to be valid, right? The whole notion of validity is that a lot of times communities will view these outside researchers with a lack of trust, really rightfully so. And so, really focusing on those relationships, which was a part of the information shared on that slide, I think as being really tantamount to ever even, before even beginning the conversation of whether or not the data that we've got is valid. For me, as someone who writes grants and reports out on our nonprofit to receive funding, it is interesting what is prioritized in terms of what is valid data, right? Numbers, graphs, that kind of thing is really valued. Whereas maybe stories and voices from the community themselves is not as much, viewed as valid. And so just really kind of reorienting ourselves to what it means to be valid data if we really are putting our communities and the folks that nonprofits and funders seek to serve at the forefront.
Thank you so much for adding that in, Annie. It's powerful in so many ways. I'm going to pause us in the group discussion here. I'm pretty confident we could spend the next 20 minutes just diving more into these things, wrestling, seeing the connection across different ideas, and wrestling with some more of the challenges. Opened at the start to say, we're not going to solve all these things today. We aren't. But I just want to call attention to the fact that, this community exists. There's so many other people, as you're starting to wrestle with some of these things. There's people here on this call that are also wrestling with these things. So opportunity to connect, to share practice, share what's working, what's not working. We definitely don't have all the answers. Also eager to learn from y'all. But basically, this is an invite to continue the conversation after this wraps up in the next 20 minutes with each other. Maybe I'll turn it over to you to keep the conversation going and close us out here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we could flip next page, I think we were basically kind of getting here in our conversation already, but we were talking about noticing and relating with these power dynamics, but now how do we bring things to practice? And so we want to actually close with one final activity where we want to draw out a process within each of our organizations and point out an opportunity to redesign that process in a way that, at least to a degree, addresses some of these power dynamics. So I want to start off with just a quick example of our own. So again, at Chicago Beyond, we're a funder, and we've thought a lot about our sourcing process, for example, and where we have unintentional barriers to entry that prevent otherwise phenomenal organizations from getting the opportunity to receive funding. I know when we first started off as an organization, we had various things like challenge grants or equity challenges where different organizations were applying in order to receive a set amount of funding. One of the things we noticed in this is, there's often one of the power dynamics that just exists is around who already has access to resources. So we ended up, funding larger organizations, organizations that potentially had more capital to have a professional grant writer or have the time to dedicate to writing a robust proposal. What we kind of do now is we try and really invest in hyperlocal organizations that are doing the work in the moment. Is we try and also co-create and co-write grants with organizations that we intend to fund, and we've thought deeply how to make this process still rigorous in that, but that co-development process has been really helpful for us and for the organizations themselves. Before we turn it over, because I think we're going to go back in some breakout rooms, Shira, I was wondering if you could share, I know you had some insights from the recent COVID-19 Rapid Response Fund that the Philanthropy Network convened.
Yeah, hi everyone. Happy just to kind of give one example. There's several and happy to talk to anyone offline about these as well. But with the COVID-19 Prevention and Response Fund, this time around, we definitely instituted more of the participatory trust-based model, brought together 15 advisors who were the ones that structured the fund. But one of the things the advisors brought out in the structure of the fund was the need to make sure that we had the applications translated into a number of different languages for the community, and felt like that was a major barrier to entry. And we definitely found that in the conversation with the advisors, they definitely said to us, my guess is people are going to open these applications. They're not really going to understand what's going to be needed, but if it's in their primary language, in their first language, because many times, as you know, a number of people are speaking multiple languages, they'll have a more of a comfort level and already kind of have a trust of understanding what is going to be needed so that they actually apply for funding. And we definitely saw that to be true. So while we noticed that people were opening the applications and reading them in their language of comfort, they were also asking for phone calls so that we could write down their application materials. But they were obviously willing to do that in English, even though we did say we'd provide translators for folks. So just, limiting another barrier to entry and making sure that we were getting grants to some of the smaller organizations.
Thanks for sharing, Shira. Definitely, I think that could resonate with all of us. I think what we wanted to do is we're running up close to the end of our time together, but wanted to quickly hop back into the original breakout rooms we had. Goal here is to just kind of think through, just like the examples we were sharing, how could we change a process in our current organizations to really open up access, not restrict things from being valid or invalid, and really challenge these power dynamics. So Mariah, if we could separate us out again, we'll try and do this quickly, just kind of have a little bit more of an open discussion. And we'll kind of come back here with 5 minutes left.
All right, found the unmute button. That was a journey. Again, I feel like no way we had enough time to totally get there. Shout out accountability group for some great discussion. I'm really getting into how do we seed power, and how do we shift power kind of through our processes in the conversation. So just an appreciation for that. We unfortunately have 4 minutes left. Don't have time for all of us to come back together and then share out the conversations. But again, just encouraging this group to continue to process some of these things with each other. I think it's important, something our group was talking about, and just to elevate here, the importance of this conversation happening, not just with funders in silos, right? But bringing this conversation to community organizations, researchers, everybody who's here on this call, and beyond. So continue the conversation, relating, and seeking how we can, do more. I'm going to close us out here real quick with a final note, and that, hopefully through this exercise, through the breakouts, the activities, we've seen that where power gets in the way, but also we have the power to change, right? The folks on this call, in many ways are keeping the status quo together. How do we notice? How do we relate with one another to enable that authentic truth and ultimately enable more impact? Because fundamentally the power starts with us. It starts with everybody here on this call, collaboratively, building a better system for data measurement, evaluation, and research. With that, thank you so much, Mariah, team, Shira, the Philadelphia Network, Greater Philadelphia, Philanthropy Network of Greater Philadelphia. Got it. Awesome. There's a survey. Folks could take that. And with that, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and we just want to thank again all of you for being here, and for John and Advite for helping us walk through a lot of these issues along with everyone else on their team. So I'll just leave this up for a second to let you give us your feedback. We will also be following up with the email with the recording, additional resources, and of course, contact information for you to reach out to the team if you have any additional questions.